What's one historical myth that you want to debunk once and for all? Well, once and for all, there are plenty that are more important, but there is one that I want to tackle, and it's this one, my friends. This one. It's gonna get crazy, so I'm gonna jump right into it. Okay, so what is this? Well, witches put the craft in craft beer. What the heck does this mean? Well, there are a few articles online that I found recently that talk about how the idea of the witch, the pointy hat, and other characteristics come and are related to alewives. Now, if you don't know what an alewife is, wives in the medieval period, not always wives, usually even unmarried women, but generally speaking wives, would brew ale and beer at home. It's a thing, something that happened in the medieval period. There are a few articles, like this one here as well, The Dark History of Women, Witches, and Beer. Before we start reading this, let me just tell you, what you're going to read is nonsense. But just so you know that it's one of those. Beer and witches have far more in common than one might suspect. Already wrong. Whether you are out partying during this spooky season or just hanging out watching a Halloween movie, you are bound to run into one of them eventually. So it is good to understand their feminist origins. Feminist origins of beer, guys. I'll get back to this. Beer has historically been viewed as the pinnacle of manly drinks, in quotes. Men have claimed it as a drink by men and for men. The drink of the Super Bowl and boys' night. That's very American, by the way, whoever you are. Little do they know, beer has been brewed by women since the beginning of its inceptions almost 10,000 years ago by Babylonian and Sumerian female brewsters. No feminist origins of witches? Well, I mean, let me address this very quickly. So the overall idea of these first two paragraphs before we continue is that beer brewing was done by women before men took it away from them. And therefore, due to the fact that women were brewing beer in the medieval period, this is where it's going to go, beer brewing has a feminist origin. Now, I would like to, Annabelle, if I can, sweetheart, how about I call you sweetheart? Even if this were true, and I'm going to debunk it in a second, but even if this was true, it would be their feminine origin. So let's say for a second that before bad men took away beer in the late medieval period from women, it was something done exclusively and mostly from women. If that were true, it would make it a feminine thing. The reason why feminist is the worst word that they could have used for this. It's the following. You're going to laugh your head off, but it's the following. While it's true that medieval wives in the early Middle Ages, the 1400s, were indeed brewing ale and beer at home, it's because it was considered as something that a trad wife, we could say, but a wife would do. So, woman in the kitchen, woman cooks, woman cleans, woman makes ale so I can drink it. While you're at it, make me a sandwich. What's feminist about that? There's nothing if anything, it's the most gender role traditionalist thing that you could ever think. So there's nothing feminist about it. Even if it were true, there is nothing feminist about the idea of a medieval wife taking care of brewing, okay? I'm just saying. But as I was saying, it's easy to debunk this because while it's true that when it comes to personal production at home, yeah, women did do that all the way up to the 15th century, and then it's true that it was switched, but we'll see why. Whoever is doing this is forgetting a very important word. I'm going to say it, and the moment I say this word, you'll facepalm because you're like, oh, of course. You ready? In 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Monasteries. GG, well played. What can I say? The freaking monks were producing beer and ale since the damn 5th century, all the way through the Middle Ages, all the way into the late Middle Ages. The monks were brewing beer like their Christian salvation depended on it. So to say, how do you even forget something like that? Is it unbelievable? The monks. If you think, oh, come on, this is so obvious. No, 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 you've seen nothing. Let's go. When humanity largely functioned as hunter-gatherers or early agrarian societies, the work was primarily divided between men and women. Yes, women were expected to do most of the food and drink preparation, including the early forms of beer, so feminist of them. The drinks had stood the test of time, and centuries later, men began to become concerned about the level of autonomy beer brewing offered women who chose to be brewers by trade. False! Here is the thing. I tell you, when it's about political pandering, they always start with a truth, they move into half-truth, and they end with a lie. It's always the same pattern. So yes, what they were saying here is true. Then you have the half-truth because they're forgetting the monasteries, and then they go into the lie. There is a reason as to why in the late 15th century, the production of beer moved not necessarily into the hands of men, in the sense that, they wanted to do, women were becoming too independent. What, in the freaking Middle Ages? Independent? No, it's not that. There is a reason. I'll tell you. Got some notes here on the side. There are some specific reasons. It has to do with guilds, because it became something that could be profited of, and so of course there was some taxation and some production. So, but when it comes, because of course do remember that when we are talking about the Middle Ages and women brewing beer and ale, first they did it for the family, but in rural societies, particularly in rural areas, before it became something that had to do with guilds and the cities, in the rural areas you produced the ale, but because you produced a lot, then what that did is that you had extra. So what do? You sell it, right? Particularly if you go to, say, a local festival, which they did have a lot in the Middle Ages, you could sell it and make a little profit off of it. But it was never, when it comes to that kind of production, it wasn't like a massive industrial production. And when it did become industrial, particularly after the introduction of hop, which helped with the preservation, after that happened, then it's not that men took it away from women to control them, is that it became controlled by the authorities. The legal status of a woman, particularly if she wasn't married, was lower of that of a man in the medieval period. She was married, depends on who she's married, her status could be pretty good. But when it comes to like that kind of situation where guilds needed to be involved and the authorities wanted to have their own, there was like a kind of standardization of it, then yes, then at that point, because of the legal status of men, then it was easier that a guy would own an actual brewery, but inside the brewery you could still have women, so they don't even know their history, by the way. But it's not a matter of, because of control. It has nothing to do with that. But anyways, let's continue. As beer began to become more profitable in Europe and early American colonies, women were able to garner independence from it, independence that threatened the sexist foundation men had built. No comment. As a result, female beer brewers were demonized. Here we go. Here it is, guys. By the societies they lived in. Around the late 1600s, the Salem witch trials began, a targeted attack on women who were able to create their own method of sustaining themselves with the same skills they once used to serve their families and frequently their husbands. All right? So, and then the same women demonized for their herbal skills were put to the flames. This is fantasy, for their beer brewing abilities. All right, all of this is absolute, utter, complete, total nonsense. First, the witch trials are post-medieval. That's one thing I want to say. Yes, they did have sometimes, the idea of trying to catch witches, just like the idea of defending yourself from vampires, more on that later maybe, goes back to antiquity. Specifically witches, you find mentions in ancient Rome, you find mentions in ancient Greece. There are a couple that have YouTube channels these days. So I'm just saying, that idea, it's been around. Yeah, I know, the article is crazy. But the idea that witch trials or burning at the stake of heretics and witches, it's not just women. There is a 20-25% of those victims are men. I'd like to underline that, for sorcery and incantations. For some reasons, they always forget that. So, the reality is, the majority were women. That's true. That's a fact. But 25% is not a small amount, and those were men. And they were burnt at the stake, condemned, beheaded. Kind of depends on the situation. Sometimes they are buried with a stone on top of them. There are situations, 25%, and this is corroborated by medieval and early modern court ledgers. So it's data. available when it comes to that, which kind of defeats this men versus women dichotomy that is too simplistic as a position. But in general, what we will see today, so we talked about the monasteries. I've got a few, Abbey of St. Denis, for example, or St. Remy, that produced their own beer as early as the 4th century AD. They were already producing it in large numbers. Same for St. Gallen Monastery in Switzerland, 820, they were already mass producing it, and those are all men. So I'm just saying, it's one of those situations. But regardless, when it comes to the witches, and then I'll get back to this idea of why in the 15th century it became standardized and so authorities got involved. Has to do with like the utilization of municipal mills to grind in large proportions, and that needed to be regulated. That's why men got involved. It's not a matter of sexism. Yeah, noble ones, if you like this video and you would like me to continue to annihilate this absolute, complete, utter nonsense, regardless of any possible backlash, please consider getting one of my plushies. This way you can support me bashing these lying cretins into outer space. Thank you very much. Link in the description. Come on, do it now. You know you want me to continue. Come on, show me the fiber of your fabric. Link in the description. I do want to talk about this. They were burnt at the stake. There is zero evidence, and I looked. Zero evidence when it comes to women that were burnt at the stake as witches because they were brewing beer. Nothing. Zero. Completely made up. I'll tell you more about it. Many of the men, particularly the ones in leadership, were threatened by female independence, typical female independence in the late 13th century, and declared these women witches regardless of any malicious intent or actual magical abilities. It's a bit of a problem because if you are fighting for feminism, then get your facts straight, because you have to decide. Either you do have feminine and female independence in the Middle Ages, which means, well, then they're not oppressed, they're independent. Or they are oppressed, so you can't say that there is female independence. It's one of the two. They're mutually exclusive. A surprising number of symbols we associate with witches today come from this time period, and a negative light casts on entrepreneur women who were just trying to create an independent life for themselves. And then she's going to talk about the cauldron, the freaking cauldron. This is all false. Who writes these articles? This is all false. So I don't even know where to start, guys. There is a lot. There is a lot to talk about here. Let's begin with the pointy hat, shall we? Does she mention the pointy hat? Let me see. Hat. There we go. Hats. There we go. So female brewers also wore tall pointed hats. False. No. Zero. I've looked into it. I looked at it. I looked at manuals from the 1430s. 1475, 1512, 1577. I looked at all the different images. Zero, nothing. The only pointy hats that you can find that are associated with a negative, usually negative interpretation of the masses in some countries in medieval Europe are those used by Jews. Full stop. There is not a single image. In fact, I'll tell you what medieval imagery and illuminations, how they represent witches. There isn't a single one. I think the first one is from the late 18th century and early 19th century. Then that's when we get the pointy hat. This is complete, utter fabrication. The way witches are described and drawn in medieval art is either completely naked, half naked, or wearing common peasant clothing, and that's it. Full stop. There is no such a thing as a special hat, nor was there a special hat worn by female brewers. Nowhere. And again, I looked into it. Neither with the witches in the medieval period, nor with female brewers specifically. Let's continue. So that they can get easily spotted in the markets. Complete nonsense. Much like the spooky fictional witches of today. Had nothing to do with it. Many also had cats. Even this thing with the cats. If anything, cats were seen positively in the medieval period. I know you're thinking of Pope Gregory. I'll make a different video on that. That's also a myth, but regardless. Cats were seen as positive in the medieval period because a lot of farms needed cats to protect from rats. And not only farms did that, but also breweries. So, cats were a common pet in the Middle Ages, but it was not associated with black magic. If anything, you know what animals were associated with black magic by the Catholic Church, the Curia, and in general Christendom? Goats, dogs, bulls as well, but mostly goats. The goat is the demonic animal. And even though it is, farmers still had goats for the cheese and the milk. It's not like twist their head. No, they still had them. But if you look, yeah, poor goats, exactly. So yeah, the goat, the ram, the goat, the dog, and I'm not making it up. Like, I'm looking at the actual iconography, or like the way they are described by actual medieval writers. Never a mention of a cat. For example, at the time of the witch trials, so post-medieval, beers were often brewed in large cauldron-like pots, that's correct, that bubbled with the heat as they stirred. Sound familiar? You idiot. This would not be visible by the people in the streets. This is something that you would do in your house separately during the brewing process. But you wouldn't take the freaking cauldrons to the street markets. No, because we know how the ale was transported after being brewed, which was a long process, by the way, to where it was sold when you had extra. And it's either in wooden barrels or in pottery, like vases or amphorae, like they did in the Roman period, by the way. So no, there will be no cauldron to be seen with a woman doing this and people on the side, the medieval people on the side going, oh, you see, that's a witch, she's brewing a poison. Nothing. And if you look, and I swear, I probably spent too long looking at actual court documents from the medieval period and post-medieval when it comes to witches. They never mention the only thing they mention is either poison, but that's poison. Like, oh yeah, this witch poisoned this individual, burn her to the stake. That's one thing they say as an accusation. Or another one, the only time that I found a mention that had to do with a brewery was saying not that the witch was the brewer, but that a witch had tried to poison the ale in the brewery to kill the population. Nothing. Finally, they used broomstick. Oh yeah, my gosh, I called it. Broomstick placed outside their doors to signify that they were open for business and had beer available to sell. Now, this is a maybe. I looked into it. It is possible that maybe in some areas, not everywhere in Europe, but it is possible that in some areas maybe they did this, but it's not documented, so it's speculative. It's possible, you could hang up a broom, but then again, a broom is associated with witchcraft. It is one of the few things that they get right. But it's not because a broom is associated with brewing. That has nothing to do with it. It's because a broom is something that most people had at home, and it was indeed, in the medieval period, associated with women. So, considering the fact that a lot of witches were women, not all of them as we discussed, but a lot of them were, is it really so strange to imagine that they would fly using an object that is normally associated in women in the medieval mind? But it's not the only one. In fact, the idea that witches fly with a broom becomes primary once again in the Victorian period and in modern imagination. But if you look at the way witches are represented in medieval iconography, sometimes they fly because they fly. They don't need an object, they just levitate. That's one way they're represented. Other times, you know what they ride? A freaking goat, connecting again to the satanic symbolism of the goat, meaning the devil and diabolical witchcraft and all and what that. That is very common. And sometimes the broom, other times is a regular stick, doesn't even need to be a broom. And so there is that. They are really stretching here, trying to connect it, because again, everyone had a freaking broom. Their creativity and years of effort are forgotten. Well, not with me, because I do medieval history, so this is going to become a video eventually, so I guess I'm helping the history of women in this case. Like so many historical female accomplishments erased to form a more convenient narrative. Isn't that ironic that someone whose article is 95% myths, isn't it ironical that they say, the other people, it's like this is a projection. This is a projection. So next time you see a witch on a late night joyride or crack open a cold one with the boys, remember the pointy-heighted beer brewing cat taming women that never existed of the war on witches. Without them, we'd have a very different Halloween and far fewer craft beer connoisseurs. Now, wouldn't it be better to ditch the nonsense, do proper research, and then tell the history of the women in the medieval period that were brewing in their houses for the family and for the local community? Isn't that better they're pushing this absolute, complete, total, utter nonsense? I mean, I don't know. Is it just me? The cat protecting grain, if you really want to take the cat and say, what type of person in the medieval mind is the cat associated with? It wouldn't be brewers, it would be millers. And this is once again based on tales. Tales. Like you read fairy tales. If you hear people mentioning cat in connection to what? Millers. Brewers too, but millers first. So if the cat was magical in the witchcrafty sense, then it would condemn millers before it condemned brewers. So that's another one. Here's the thing that I wanted to say about this. Let me see. Yes, so the real difference between the 13th century, 12th century, 14th century, and then finally the jump into the 15th century, as I was saying, is mass production. And one thing that I did write here in my notes that I wanted to share with you is the fact that basically the difference is that we went, when it comes to brewing, from small scale to large scale production, which involved the local authorities. And that's the reason why this happened. So craft organizations, which basically are medieval guilds, got involved also because the real reason why that happened has nothing to do with sexism, it's taxes. Have you ever seen the way medieval lieges and noblemen, proprietors, people that owned land, they tax everything? You pick up snails, there is a tax for it. You fish in the pond and it belongs to your lord, there is a tax for it. For the fish that you sell it, there is a tax. You go into the grove, into the woods and you get some, not poaching, but I'm saying legally, you get a couple of deers, there is a tax for it. There is a tax for literally, even frogs, they had a tax for frogs. If you pick up the frogs, you cook them and you sell it, there is a tax for it. Therefore, once they saw that the brewing had a potential for a market, they taxed it. And once there is taxation, there is standardization, and once there is standardizations, there are licenses involved, and so it enters the legal system. And obviously, once it enters the legal system, because of the way the medieval society was organized, a wife, once again, could own a business together with her husband, but an unmarried woman, technically she could, but it was harder, and that's true. So that's what happened. It's a displacement between the difference of private and domestic production once it reaches the big cities, and so it's connected to urbanization. Do you think this person has ever seen anything like this? Ever? It's unbelievable. Another reason, how I was mentioning that one of the counter-arguments to the fact that both men and women brewed beer in history, and I was talking about the monasteries, is also because I have read. Now, I didn't double check this, so do take it with a pinch of salt, but it does make logical sense. However, logics alone is not enough. It would be nice to have some period source mentioning it, so we'll have to see. But I heard that one of the reasons why often in monasteries it was very common to produce ale and beer, it was because it would help them through fasting. So not only that they liked it, I mean, monks enjoyed a little drink, that's one thing. The other one is that they're busy, ora et labora, so you want to keep busy, basically, so that gives them something to do. Great. The other thing is the possible profit, because depending, if they are Franciscans, no, but if it's a different type of monastery, they can still make money anyways and give it to the poor, make money, give it to the church. They don't have to use it on themselves. It depends on the type of monks they were talking about. But I heard that one of the possibilities is because you have to imagine that at least in the early and high medieval period, beer was considered in some cultures as food, liquid food. This changes in the late Middle Ages, and then it becomes more of a drink. But yeah, it was considered as food, and so it could help them sustain themselves while they were fasting. But I did not double check this one. I read it on a few PhD theses, so I imagine this was peer reviewed, but they unfortunately didn't put any bibliography to it. So once again, it makes sense logically. Is it actually backed by the sources? I'm not ready to go that far, but I will look into it. So anyways, yeah, so this was the nonsense article, not the only one. The dark history of women, witches, and beer. The history of women in brewing goes back millennia, where it was a respected profession. Once again, calling it a profession is a form of presentism, because while it does become a profession in the late medieval period, in the early medieval period, all the way back to early Middle Ages, high Middle Ages, it wasn't a profession. It was part of the duties of a woman at home, because I was explaining, they make porridge, okay? They're making porridge, they're making ale, they're cleaning the house, and that's it. Like, they do that because it's part of what a woman, or a wife, should I say, is expected to do within the culture of the 13th century in medieval Europe. It's not a profession, though, at least until we reach the late medieval period, where guilds get involved, as we discussed. Billions of people enjoy a nice beer in the evening to unwind. Yes, beer is the third most consumed beverage in the world after water and tea, and has been an essential part of the human diet for at least 7,000 years. Probably even longer than that. I don't know if this is true, if it's one in the top three. I mean, I don't believe anything that they sing, but this is big thing, so I would imagine. Even for those of us who don't like the stuff, the history of beer is a curious thing to study, I agree. Particularly when you go into ancient Egypt. And honey. If we want to look at something that is fascinating in ancient Egypt, look up beer and honey. Especially since it is Women's History Month, and the history of beer making is primarily a history of women. Okay, I guess Big Thing as well is into the messages. A history of female brewers. Beer was originally... Why can they not say that the history of brewing also involves women, rather than saying primarily? Because if you go to primarily, then where do all the Catholic monks go? And it's not even just that, but then if we look at it's just one of those things anyways. In the Dark Ages, brewers, women who brewed beer, had some rather odd advertising methods. To be noticed in crowd markets, they tend to wear a tall pointed hats. You see, even Big Thing is pushing the same stuff. You can't trust anyone these days. Even Big Thing did not put a second into doing the research to debunk the pointy hat nonsense, to indicate the brew was ready. They're repeating the same thing. It's a copycat. Talking about cats, it's a copycat. Broomstick would be placed in the doorway of alehouses, then again speculative. Images of frothing cauldrons full of ready product and six-sided stars to indicate the quality of the brew also abounded. That would be a confession. Like, if you were a witch into witchcraft, that would be suicide. That's like ridiculous. What? Can you imagine? Like, oh yeah, I wonder why that brewing witch was caught. Man, how did the Templars find her? Oh, I don't know. Maybe the freaking six-pointed... Get put an image of that devil at this point. Come on. Oh my gosh, the stupidity. Lastly, out of manifest necessity, cats would be, okay, they're just repeating the same absolute nonsense. It's unbelievable. Unbelievable. And then again, the question, in a culture where beer defines part of the national character, already national character when talking about the Middle Ages, I can be a little pedantic on that one, on the semantics of it. The question of who controls the brew is paramount. He who has his hand on the levers of power also has his thumb in the people's beer mug. There we go. Yeah, the standards of quality. Finally, in the 1500s, the oldest food purity laws still on the books, many women were forced out of the market due to increased production costs. Yes, that's correct. In a few hundred years, breweries were monopolized by men. But then again, see, that's what I mean. That's exactly what I mean. So, this is correct. Standardizer beer, we talked about it. This is correct that some women couldn't own it, but that doesn't mean that they were kicked out. They were still working. Up to the, I think, mid-14th century, 15% of the breweries of Strasbourg still had women in them working. They weren't kicked out because now it's only men that, no, men legally own them, but the women were still in it. They were still working there, some of the women. So that's again nonsense. I don't know what they're trying to prove. We know that there even a century later there were still women employed in the Oxford brewery. They weren't forced out. This is nonsense. And the women that were doing it before, they weren't brewing them in an entrepreneur sense. So it would also be dangerous to be a woman with extensive knowledge of how herbs and plants could mix well together to provide nourishment and healing to the drinker when the Inquisition were at the height across Europe, which once again is not in the medieval period. I want to see the conclusion. Which brings us to the women have had a long hand in brewing. With the poor quality of water before modern sun. Okay, they're going into the poor water. These women played a vital... You could boil it. Probably been doing it since the freaking Stone Age. Humanity healthy and nourished, okay? While the occupation has long since been taken over by men in the West, it remained a woman's job in parts of Latin America and Africa. As women begin to re-enter the brewing industry with fewer fears of being burnt as witches... Clown! What's the name? What's the name? What's the name of the person who wrote this? What's the name of the clown? Did you put the name? Did you have the, let me see, politics and current affairs? Oh, okay. Scotty. It's a confession again. Politics and current affairs, guys. What can I tell you?